In the American TV series Breaking Bad, he is a well-known flashy lawyer who specializes in defending criminals, to the point that even drug enforcement officers steer clear of him. But who would have thought that just a few years ago, he was an unnoticed intern working in the mailroom of his brother's law firm, arranged by his brother. He wasn't willing to stay in the shadows forever, and after multiple efforts, he finally passed the bar exam alongside his colleague Kim. As soon as he got the results, he rushed to his brother Chuck's office. Because Chuck was busy with work, he had no idea what his brother Jimmy was being considered for regarding the bar exam. When he saw Jimmy's acceptance level, Chuck could hardly believe his eyes, as he had worked incredibly hard to earn that same certificate years ago. Now, his brother managed to pass it while working part-time, which inevitably made Chuck feel a bit jealous. He tried to suppress his impure thoughts and half-heartedly celebrated Jimmy's achievement. Then Jimmy asked his brother if he could hire him, and Chuck was momentarily taken aback before remembering that Jimmy wanted to be a lawyer. Chuck said he needed to discuss it with his partners first. However, when his colleagues were celebrating for Jimmy Howard, a partner of HHM law firm, came over, sent other colleagues away, and talked to Jimmy alone. After Howard's words, Jimmy was not hired as a lawyer by HHM law firm. Apparently, someone thought he was more suitable to work in the mailroom. It was from this time that Chuck inexplicably developed a strange disease of electromagnetic radiation allergy, and later had to stay at home and be taken care of by Jimmy. Since he couldn't be a lawyer in HHM law firm, he decided to work on his own. Since then, Crazy Jimmy began to work hard in the green world. Finally, under the reminder of Xiaojin, he began to specialize in the field of elder law. On this day, Jimmy came to a nursing home called Kyodu to help his clients make a will. While looking for clients, he didn't forget to hand out business cards. Dedicated Jimmy would not let anyone miss the opportunity to become his client. After his client finished making a will, Jimmy asked for $140. However, the old lady searched for a long time and only found $43. She felt embarrassed and asked Jimmy to take the will away first, saying that she would make up for it after she received the allowance next week. But Jimmy didn't do that. He left the old lady an address and said that she could send the money when she had it. He also gave the old lady a 20% discount. It can be seen that Jimmy is very sympathetic to some customers in need. However, just as Jimmy was about to leave, he suddenly felt that something was wrong with the allowance the old lady had just mentioned. So he went back to ask for clarification. He was shocked to find out that the allowance was a secret payment after the social security and pension of the elderly were taken and their living expenses were deducted. The remaining money was distributed to them in the form of allowance. The old lady thought it was convenient, and everyone accepted this method. Jimmy's keen sense of smell made him feel that there must be something fishy. He called the old lady's friends together to study the bill. As expected, the words that the elderly could not see clearly were hiding today's secrets, but the smart Jimmy did not make it public. He planned to find enough evidence first, but what Jimmy didn't know was that his behavior was discovered by the lady at the front desk. Jimmy went back to his brother's house without stopping, took the customer information he left there, and prepared to look for evidence. His brother also guessed that the purpose of putting the information here was to show it to him. Chuck confessed that he was fooled by Jimmy and promised that he would never see Jimmy pretending to be nothing, and then talk about business with his brother. He told Chuck about the nursing home's fraudulent behavior he found, and the evidence could be found in these bills. Because the font was too small, Chuck could only use a magnifying glass to see that a box of tissues for the client cost $14, which was obviously too high. Although the amount of each item was not high, this consumable was used up very quickly, and with the large customer base of the nursing home, the number would become very large. Chuck couldn't believe that this was a case he had seen before, and he actually overlooked such important data. Jimmy comforted Chuck, saying that he might have been careless and didn't read the small print, and said that he was just lucky. Jimmy also investigated and found out that this nursing home is a national chain. Hearing this, Chuck reminded him that if Jimmy found their operating model and collected more evidence, he could file a class action lawsuit. Hearing that his brother was willing to help him, Jimmy was very excited and was ready to immediately fight back against Yaodu Nursing Home to collect evidence. However, when Jimmy came here again to register, the front desk who discovered Jimmy's intention hurriedly stopped his behavior. Jimmy saw them destroying evidence through the window crack, so he was ready to forcibly stop them. But unexpectedly, the other side brought in two burly guys who pushed Jimmy back. A wise man doesn't take unnecessary risks. Just as Jimmy was about to leave, he suddenly thought of an idea and pretended that his stomach hurt from being pushed. Jimmy told the receptionist he needed to use the restroom, and without thinking much, she let him go. Once in the bathroom, he immediately started writing a legal letter, and before long, he filled an entire sheet of paper with dense writing. As Jimmy got caught up in it, the receptionist began urging him from the door. When he ran out of paper, he used toilet paper instead, but in the end, he was still kicked out. But Jimmy was like an indestructible cockroach. He waited from day till night until the front desk finally threw out the destroyed, shredded documents. After making sure that no one was there, Jimmy went to the trash can. In order to turn his life around, Jimmy decided to risk it all. He dove into the stinking trash can to look for evidence and accidentally found a child's diaper. What's worse is that the two bodyguards from the day came to take out the trash. Jimmy didn't dare to make a sound at this time and could only endure the filth that was coming at him. Just as the two of them left, Jimmy's phone suddenly rang. It turned out to be a call from Richie, the lawyer appointed by Confidential Do. He saw the lawyer's letter written by Jimmy and prepared to test Jimmy first. At this time, Jimmy could only answer the phone in a low voice and listed the crimes of Confidential Do one by one. He also bet that he would find more evidence. Richie wanted Jimmy to speak louder. Jimmy had to lie that he was enjoying Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, and heard the information Jimmy learned, which was indeed unfavorable to his client. The cunning Richie hurriedly changed the subject. He asked Jimmy if he was suitable for Chuck McGill to meet. because the two have the same last name. And after all, everyone in the legal profession knows Chuck. Jimmy admits that Chuck is his brother, confirming their relationship. Richie says that he called Jimmy just for Chuck's sake, and his threat to Jimmy constitutes extortion. If he dared to continue to mess around, he would be charged, but Jimmy was obviously not scared by him at this time. Seeing that Jimmy was not easy to fool, Richie had to retreat tactically. After Jimmy came out of the trash can with nothing, he was so angry that he kicked him. When Jimmy finally got up, he found another trash can next to him. He opened the lid and looked at the destroyed information. Sure enough, Jimmy took the evidence back to his brother's house and saw the densely packed notes on the ground. This was undoubtedly a huge project. In this way, Jimmy fought for a whole night. When Chuck woke up, he found that Jimmy had made a mess. He used Jimmy to explain that he just needed a place to work. Actually, Chuck was not angry about asking his brother to help him. He agreed to Jimmy's work here and poured Jimmy a cup of coffee. However, when he came over with the coffee, he found that Jimmy was already fast asleep. Chuck put a pillow under Jimmy to make his brother sleep more comfortably, and then he continued Jimmy's work. When Jimmy woke up, Chuck had heard several pieces of solid evidence. Seeing this, Jimmy was very excited, and Chuck took the initiative to join Jimmy's investigation, to get the recognition and help of his brother, the great lawyer. This was what Jimmy had always wanted. Then Jimmy asked Xiaojin for help, asking him to help him copy some legal documents from the HHM law firm. But Jimmy wanted too much, which was beyond Xiaojin's ability, and it would take several hours to complete. With no other choice, Jimmy had to ask for his brother Chuck's help. Chuck gave Jimmy the green light to use his resources. Kim was surprised that Jimmy could work on a case with Chuck, especially since Chuck had just been in the hospital. Jimmy didn't want others to think his brother was incapable, so he assured everyone that Chuck was perfectly fine. The next morning, Rich received the evidence from Chuck and Jimmy, and reluctantly, he had to cancel his plans for the day to deal with this matter. At this point, Jimmy had been waiting for a long time. He politely stepped outside to greet Rich and the others upon their arrival. Considering Chuck's health condition, Jimmy reminded them to leave all phones and electronic devices in the car. Rich had heard about Chuck's illness, so he ordered his subordinates to comply with Jimmy's request. The group was seated at a table that had already been prepared. Chuck, who hadn't negotiated a case in a while, felt a bit nervous. Jimmy encouraged Chuck, saying that they were intimidated by him. All he had to do was sit there with a serious face, and the rest would be handled by him. Once the renowned Chuck made his entrance, everything would change. Several people stood up to greet him. Li Qi even smiled and tried to get close to him by talking about the experience of working with Chuck 10 years ago. Facing Li Qi's brothel, Chuck just perfunctorily said hello, and then several people went straight to the point. Li Qi first mocked Jimmy for the so-called evidence he picked up from the trash can, but Jimmy sarcastically responded that the other party couldn't even afford to buy a lock, so as long as it was thrown out, it would belong to public property. Li Qi said that Jimmy's accusation that the confidential department was abusing the elderly to claim compensation was non-existent. Their clients are spread across the country, and no matter where they go, those elderly people live very comfortably. Then he added that the few clients you have who were overcharged were just due to auditing issues, which are isolated incidents and do not constitute fraud. They roughly calculated that Jimmy's clients had suffered about $46,000 in losses, and as compensation, Rich agreed to not only cover the client's losses, but also pay an additional $40,000 for their emotional distress. Add up to more than $90,000, just make up a roundup, and compensate your client $100,000, provided you agree to withdraw the complaint against Jiaodu. After hearing this, Jimmy produced evidence to prove that Jiaodu was illegal interstate trade, which was obviously a fraud case, and the compensation should be at least 3 times the amount. Are you giving a mere $100,000 to a beggar? While talking, Jimmy looked at Chuck from time to time. Although Chuck said nothing, his authority played a significant role. If Chuck wasn't there, Jimmy would lose in terms of momentum. Richie discussed with his companions and asked Jimmy to name a price. At this time, Chuck finally spoke up and directly asked for $20 million. Jimmy was shocked. Richie didn't expect Chuck to ask for so much. Chuck said that if he didn't agree, he would see him in court. This move caught Richie off guard. He had to suspend the negotiation and go back to find a solution. Jimmy thought his brother was crazy, but Chuck looked confident, stating that their extensive client base across the country was enough to constitute a federal class action lawsuit, and asking for $20 million was actually a conservative estimate. I have to say, Chuck still knows how to play his cards right. This maneuver left Jimmy's mind racing, to the point that when his brother assigned him a task, he got a bit distracted. By the time Jimmy returned with the legal documents, he was already exhausted. Chuck asked him where the legal text was. Jimmy slumped on the couch, said he forgot the materials in the car and just needed a minute to rest before going to get them. However, Chuck, who was focused on work, seemed to have forgotten his own issues. He walked straight out the door, grabbed Jimmy's car keys, and prepared to take the materials Jimmy had brought without feeling any discomfort. It was only when Jimmy reminded him that he was coming out that he felt the effects of electromagnetic radiation. This again proved that Chuck's condition was psychological, and the cause of his illness was his brother, Jim.